In November 2016, a watch sold at auction for $17 million. Not a necklace, not a painting, not a car, a watch. One single watch. And the most disturbing part of that story is not the price. It's the fact that when this watch was made, nobody wanted it. Not one person. It sat in the market like a mistake, overlooked by the very collectors who would have paid fortunes for it 30 years later. This is the Patek Philippe 1518 in stainless steel.
Yes, it was in 2016 that I've had the pleasure to sell this watch once. Since then, it's been with the same very, very distinguished collector. The 1518 in steel, to me, has always been just a myth. I think.
And if you think you understand how value works, this watch will prove you wrong. To understand what the steel 1518 is, you first need to understand what the 1518 was. Patek Philippe introduced it in 1941. The world was at war. Switzerland was surrounded.
Just at the beginning of World War II, they launched such a courageous undertaking. It is pretty much the founding stone for everything that Patek Philippe and many other manufacturers have done since.
Supply chains for luxury goods were disrupted across all of Europe. And in the middle of all of that, Patek did something that no watchmaker had ever done before. They built the first wristwatch in history to combine a perpetual calendar with a chronograph. Not a pocket watch. A wristwatch. Something small enough to sit on your arm. Both complications in a single case. That sentence is worth pausing on. A perpetual calendar is a mechanism that knows the structure of the Gregorian calendar. It knows that February has 28 days in most years and 29 in leap years. It knows which months end on the 30th and which end on the 31st. It adjusts itself automatically, without any correction from the wearer for decades.
It is the world's first perpetual calendar chronograph wristwatch made by any manufacturer in series. A bold move by Patek Philippe, as
the mechanical thinking required to build that is already extraordinary. And then Patek combined it with a chronograph, a stopwatch function, 2 pushers on the side of the case, a running seconds hand, a minute counter. Two complications that have almost nothing to do with each other functionally, made to coexist in a movement thin enough to actually wear. Most watchmakers would have refused to try. Patek tried, and it worked. The result was the Caliber 13-130, a movement that represented years of development and an almost unreasonable level of ambition for a wristwatch of its era. The dial that sat above it was just as considered. A silver or black face depending on the variant, with registers for the chronograph minutes and hours arranged symmetrically, a date aperture at the top, and small windows for the day and month cut into the lower half of the dial. It was not a chaotic dial despite everything it had to show. It was orderly, disciplined, almost calm for a watch carrying this much mechanical weight underneath it. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now are not subscribed. And I want to point that out here specifically, because the story you are watching is one of the most extraordinary things that has ever happened in the watch world. A watch that nobody wanted becoming the most expensive ever sold. That story deserves to reach more people than it currently does. If that sounds like your kind of video, subscribe, hit the bell, and send this to one person who would appreciate it. Now let's continue. Over 13 years of production from 1941 to 1954, Patek made the 1518 in 3 case metals. Yellow gold was the standard. Pink gold was the romantic option. Rose gold had its own particular warmth and its own following among collectors. Across all 3 variants, they produced approximately 281 examples. For a watch this complicated and this expensive, 281 was already a small number. These weren't watches that sat in display cases waiting for buyers. They arrived at collectors through quiet conversations in Geneva, through relationships built over years, through the kind of commerce that happens when nobody is in a hurry. And then there is the steel version. The entire known production of the Patek Philippe 1518 in stainless steel is 4 watches. Not 400. 4. Each one with its own serial number, each one with a slightly different dial. And for a long time, the collecting world wasn't even sure they were real. The idea seemed too strange. Steel was not the material you used for a complicated dress watch in the 1940s. Steel was for dive watches and field watches and tool watches. Gold was for serious horology. The Steel 1518 broke that logic entirely. So when rumors of its existence started circulating, serious people treated them with serious skepticism. They were wrong to doubt it. The watches are real. But here is what nobody has ever been able to explain. Why? No document has ever emerged from the Patek Philippe archives explaining the decision. No internal memo. No production record with a clear annotation. Nothing. What researchers believe, based on years of careful work, is that they were private commissions. 4 individual clients who asked for the 1518 in steel. 4 people who had reasons of their own, reasons that died with them, and who walked away with watches that then vanished into the private world for decades, while the rest of collecting history unfolded without them. Think about who those 4 people might have been. To wartime Switzerland attracted a particular kind of wealth. Bankers, industrialists, diplomats, refugees with assets they had moved across borders before those borders closed. People who had learned not to make themselves visible. Perhaps that explains the steel. Gold announced itself. Gold sat on the wrist and declared its own value to anyone within arm's length. Steel did not. Steel was quiet. It looked at a glance like a watch a professional might wear. Not a collector's piece. Not a statement. Just a watch. For someone trying to be invisible in a complicated era, that anonymity may have been exactly the point. Or perhaps the reasons were simpler than that. Perhaps they just liked the look of steel against their wrist. Perhaps they owned gold watches already and wanted something that felt different in the hand. We will never know. And the 4 clients took their reasons with them, and what they left behind was 4 watches and a mystery that the collecting world is still trying to fully understand 80 years later. While the yellow gold examples changed hands at prestigious auctions, while pink gold references appeared in major catalogs, the steel ones were simply gone. Somewhere, held by families who may not have known what they had. Sitting in safe deposit boxes, moving quietly through private sales that left no public record. The watch world moved on without them, and then they surfaced. The first to appear publicly in any serious way came to Christie's in Geneva in November 2016. The room knew something unusual was happening. The estimate had already been set high enough to signal that this was not an ordinary auction lot. How the cataloging alone had taken months. Researchers had spent time confirming the watch's identity, documenting its dial, verifying its case serial against the thin body of known scholarship on the steel variants. By the time it hit the auction floor, everyone in the room with serious knowledge understood what they were looking at. What happened instead was that the watch sold for 7,302,000 Swiss francs, $11 million, for a single wristwatch. It was, at that moment, the highest price ever achieved for a wristwatch at public auction. The record had been broken. The steel 1518 had revealed itself, but the story wasn't finished. 2 years later, a second steel 1518 came to market at Phillips in New York. The collecting world knew the Christie's result. The question was whether lightning strikes twice, whether the market would confirm what had happened or treat it as an anomaly. The Phillips watch sold for $17 million. The previous record didn't just fall, it was demolished. And the steel 1518 became, in the language of auction results, something close to untouchable. Now ask yourself the obvious question. Why? What exactly justifies $17 million for this watch? The mechanical answer is uncomfortable. The movement inside a steel 1518 is identical to the movement inside a yellow gold 1518. The same caliber 13-130. The same complications functioning in the same way. The same dial layout. The same case dimensions. The only difference is the material the case is made from. And a yellow gold 1518, depending on condition and provenance, might sell for somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million. The steel version sells for roughly 10 times that. The steel does not make the watch more accurate. It does not make the perpetual calendar more reliable. It does not make the chronograph easier to use. What it makes the watch is impossible to own. There are 4 of them. If you are a collector who has decided that the steel 1518 is what you want, Your entire universe of available options is 4 watches. That is the ceiling. And those 4 watches are almost certainly sitting with collectors who understand precisely what they have, who have no financial pressure to sell, who will not be moved by anything except an offer that makes walking away from the watch feel rational. This is a different kind of scarcity than what the watch industry normally produces. When a brand announces a limited run of 200 pieces, they are manufacturing desire. They are controlling supply deliberately to create exactly the feeling of urgency that drives collectors to act. The Steel 1518 is not that. Nobody at Patek Philippe in 1941 was thinking about auction results in 2016. Nobody made 4 watches in steel as a strategy. The scarcity is accidental. The 4 watches exist because 4 people asked for something unusual, and a watchmaker said yes. That is the entire explanation. That is the origin of $17 million. You cannot replicate it. You cannot commission a new one. You cannot wait for Patek to revisit the reference. The number is 4 and it will always be 4. This changes what it means to own one. Because what you are buying when you acquire a Steel 1518 is not just a watch. It is a position in an extremely small set. And every detail of these 4 watches has been studied with an intensity that would seem obsessive if the stakes were lower. Researchers know the serial numbers. They know the dial variations between each example. They can trace the chain of ownership for each watch through auction records, dealer correspondence, and collector archives going back decades. When you buy a Steel 1518, you become the documented owner of a specific, known, cataloged object with a history that is now inseparable from your own. The provenance is part of the price. The story is part of what you own. And the story is this. In 1941, 4 people wanted something that didn't fit the conventions of their era. A prestigious watch in an unglamorous material, without a clear reason. Patek made it for them. The watches disappeared. The world forgot they existed. And then, 70 years later, they came back. First as rumors, then as confirmed historical artifacts, then as the most expensive wristwatches ever sold at public auction. The watches didn't change during that journey. Not a single gear turned differently. Not one complication became more impressive. What changed was the world's understanding of what these objects were. That is how value works at this level, not in specifications, not in materials, in meaning, in position, in the story that the collecting world has agreed to tell about what matters and why. The 1518 in steel didn't earn its status by performing better than its gold equivalents. It earned it by being unrepeatable, by being the version that nobody understood until it was almost too late to find. The yellow gold 1518 is a masterpiece. The pink gold is beautiful. The rose gold has collectors who love it completely, but none of them are what the steel ones are. The steel ones are the watch that nobody wanted. And then the world figured out what it had missed. And by the time it did, there were only 4 left to find. I would love to know what you think. Does the price make sense to you? Or does $17 million for a watch say something uncomfortable about how we construct value? Let us know in the comments, and we will see you in the next one.